The gospel reading is Mark chapter 13, beginning with the 24th verse. But in those days, after the tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
So this is the time people are putting up their trees. I think somehow there's some message that you send by the tree that you put up. I know the Howells for many years. I don't know how somebody got on this thing early in my ministry that you only use white lights. I think we would put up our tree with white lights, and our message to the outside world was like, we are Christmas purists. Right? We got the. But then, I don't know, old age or something, 3 or 4 years ago, we broke down. We now have colored lights, like just wild and crazy at the Howell house. When I was a child, there was this really I've told some of you this before, this very embarrassing message that our Christmas tree sends. Somehow, I'm embarrassed to tell you even now, we had a tree that was silver. But it wasn't silver, it was silver, but then there was this light that was trained on it. It had this plastic disc that rotated. So the silver tree wasn't silver, it would be orange, and then blue, and then red. I would try to close the drapes because I felt like what this tree was saying to our neighbors was, the Howells are tacky people. And it was just so embarrassing. The thing eventually froze up. I was so delighted, I had to throw it away. When I think about messages from trees, I think about what J.R.R. Tolkien helped us with. In The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien created these tree-like characters called Ents. And the Ents said they can talk. So the hobbits wind up in the woods and they have an encounter with these Ents. And the thing about Ents is the Ents speak very slowly. And they were once asked, why do you Ents speak so slowly? And one said, we speak slowly because anything worth saying is worth saying slowly. And anything worth hearing is worth hearing slowly. It's the season of Advent, and we get this backwards, don't we? Advent ought to be the season to get slow, to listen slowly, to Mary pondered these things in her heart. But instead, we did the opposite, right? We're more rushed than ever. We're doing everything we're usually doing, but also the round of parties and shopping and traveling. And Jesus must just laugh his head off or weep for us. I'm not sure which one. Slowly. I've been trying to learn more as I get older to read the Bible slowly. Sometimes people say to me, I'm going to read the Bible in a year next year. I always feel bad as a pastor. I say, oh, please don't do that. I mean, one, you're going to get stuck in all the Begats and Chronicles and so on. But also, if you try to read the whole Bible in a year, you're going to go too fast. You've got to chew up 3 or 4 chapters a day, and you just miss it if you read it fast. What you ought to try to do next year is read just a few chapters of the Bible really slowly. I've been reading slowly lately this Genesis passage. I mean, you think you know what that says, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But if you read it slowly, something really interesting emerges. So it says, this is interesting, it says, the earth was without form and void. That's a lot of English words. In Hebrew, there's just one word, tohu wabohu. That's just fun to say. Tohu wabohu. And what tohu wabohu means, it was chaos. It was a mess. When God began creation, the world was chaos. The world was a mess. And then it says this, darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the face of the waters. I mean, the next verse, God says, let there be light. But be very clear, light was not the first thing that God created. God had pre-created, before God created the light, God had created that darkness. God had created that chaos, that tohu wa bohu. God was there. The Spirit of God was moving over the face of the dark waters. And it's also interesting to me, if you go slow, that God says, let there be. God being God, you think God would say, there shall be, doggone it. I'm God, there shall be. But instead, God says, let there be. It's almost as if God lets it happen. God creates a space for it to happen. God doesn't insist on it happening. God is not a control freak. We may be grateful for this. A lot of us try to be control people. It never works out well, does it? I've been thinking about this lately. I've been asked to write a book for this series that a publisher is putting out on childbirth. They want a theological perspective on childbirth. So I've been interviewing a lot of women who are pregnant and women who have just had children. And I just have to say, they're lovely people, but they're so clueless, right? So Lisa and I did this when Lisa was pregnant with Sarah. I got a book on, what to eat when you're expecting it. I cooked just those recipes, and Lisa didn't drink any wine or coffee or anything. We did all the right things, everything that the doctor told us to do. And then when Sarah was born, okay, do all the right things. And you think you have control, and you don't. Andrew Solomon wrote a book about this called Far from the Tree. You have to think about that. We always say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, but he says far from the tree. What he's suggesting is that, he said, this first sentence of the book is reproduction is the wrong word. We think we'll reproduce ourselves. We think we'll have children, it'll be like the best version of myself. He said, but you don't reproduce, you just produce. And what you produce is something that you cannot control. In fact, whatever you produce, if you give it time, it turns out to be a stranger. Thankfully, we don't reproduce. We don't have control. God isn't in control. God says, let there be. God lets there be all kinds of things. God lets there be space for a broken world. Back in 1966, I was really enamored with the singing duo called Simon and Garfunkel. I loved their music, such beautiful voices and harmony. It was great. And they came out a song in 1966. And I remember hearing it on the radio, and I was so charmed at first that they're singing together, Silent Night, Holy Night. The harmony's perfect, and it's so. But then you start to hear this noise in the background. You think, what is that? And the noise gets louder and louder, and finally you realize it's the 7 o'clock evening news. And so over Silent Night, you're hearing there's war in Vietnam, and there are riots in the streets, and there's violence. And you want to shut down the news. I just want to hear the pretty silent night. But God doesn't say, I only want to hear the pretty silent night. God says, let there be the news. Let there be the broken world. God lets there be space for life and also for its loss. 2 Sundays ago, I was invited by Lauren Steins, our youth minister, to teach the confirmation class. We have middle schoolers, and they're in confirmation. She asked me to come, and I said, well, I'd love to do that. Yeah, what's the topic? And she said, well, the topic is the doctrine of the atonement, the crucifixion. And I'm like, could you give me another topic? And she's trying to talk about crucifixion and the meaning of it to middle schoolers. And I found myself up there, and I'm saying something like, now, you know how it is when you have a long-time fractured relationship, and they're looking at me like, what? What? I said, how long you fractured a broken relationship that grieves you? And they're like, I don't know. My friend didn't speak to me yesterday. That hurt my feelings. And I said to Lauren, you got to be older to process this doctrine of the atonement, the crucifixion, and I don't think it's right. Because after I tried to explain it not very well, we had a Q&A time. And there was a little girl in the front row, and she raised her hand. And she asked a question. She said, why doesn't God let the people you love live forever? And she asked it in a way, I didn't think she was being a smart aleck. I think she was asking a serious question, and then I realized who she was, and I realized she's a middle schooler who has suffered the death of the people that are most important to her in her life. Why doesn't God let the people you love live forever? There's an intellectual answer to that. You could say, well, the planet would be overrun with human beings within 2 generations. Or you could say, I think this one's actually important, is that if we live forever, like what would happen is you'd just be a schmuck, right? Because you don't have to deal gently with people. You've got forever to get it right. So, we'll be ugly and I'll reconcile with him 79 years from now. Or, some people, they'd get married 39 times. Or, if you just had endless time, the fact that we only have so much time and it's fragile, that may compel us to deal well with one another. But when I thought about her question, how should we say it? God lets there be questions. Why do the people that we love die? It's almost cruel to answer the question. God doesn't mind questions. We get that wrong sometimes, don't we? We think, you can't question God. God loves questions. God lets there be hard questions. God lets there be grief at the holidays. This has been a big thing for me over time. When I started as a pastor, everything in church life seemed to be all chipper and cheerful. But I noticed that a lot of people were hurting, so I wrote this op-ed for the Charlotte Observer, and they printed it, and they've reprinted it a number of times since then, and we send it each year to people in our church who've lost somebody in the past year. It's kind of about, 'tis the season to be jolly, and everybody's happy and having a grand time, but I don't know, you lost somebody, or your relationship is broken. People say, you get to be with family at Christmas, and you're one of those who goes, family. It's hard. It's like Mitch Albom. He wrote that great book, Tuesdays with Maury. He was writing about a professor that he'd had at Brandeis named Maury Schwartz. He went to the doctor one day, and they scoped him, and they tested him. And pretty soon they were handing him literature about ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. He was stunned by this diagnosis. And he looked out the window, and he saw a woman putting money in a parking meter, and he saw somebody else pulling groceries out of the trunk of their car. He was stunned by the normalcy of the day outside, and he thought in his mind, shouldn't the world stop? Right? Don't they know what's happened to me? It's like we know, but we kind of go for the fun and the frivolity as if all God has in mind is just fun and joy and everything, and we think that if we're close to God, everything is great and wonderful. I got a stunning email the other day by a guy in our church. I've known him forever. I always thought he didn't like me. When I would be around him, he was never like chipper and warm and all this. And he'd come to church for a while, and he would vanish for a while. And I just thought, well, he doesn't like my preaching. He doesn't like me. He sent me an email the other day. It was really interesting. He said, thank you for leading our church to engage in a series next year on mental health, depression. He said, I've been dealing with serious depression for years. He said, a lot of days I can't get out of bed. I've lost jobs. He said, thank you for doing this series. He said, for years I thought if I just prayed, I'd feel better. Or if I just were more holy, God would make me better. He said, I finally have realized that this is the way I am and that God is with me in the darkness. It's really interesting. This is why Jesus is born. We get this wrong. Jesus is born. Jesus comes in the dark, and he comes as an infant, and he doesn't fix everything. He doesn't right all wrongs. His nickname is Emmanuel, which means God with us. It means that God comes to be with us, not just during times of trial, just during life, during all the darkness. I mean, Jesus grew up and he sat up on the Mount of Olives the night before he gave himself up for us. Did you hear what he said? If you read that one slowly, in those days the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall, then they will see the Son of Man. It doesn't say after everything gets light and shine and everything's happy again, then you will see the Son of Man. No, it's when it's totally dark, when it's pitch black, that's when you see the Son of Man. That's when God is there. So my counsel to you as we begin this season of Lent, of Advent, is the following. Journey into the dark. It's interesting, back in August we had an eclipse, and I knew people that are like, I'm driving to Asheville to see the darkness. I'm driving to Columbia to see the darkness, right? We're going to all this trouble to go into the darkness. Yeah, like now, during Advent, like go into the darkness. Journey into the darkness. Go to the darkness that's in your head. There's some shadow in every one of us. Like some, it seems obvious, right? Like my mother-in-law died, and everybody's like, oh, I'm sorry, Christmas must be hard. Life's just hard. You got darkness in your head. This is why we see the bad behavior that we see in public right now, right? Is that people have shadow, dumb stuff in their head, and they never dealt with it. And then it comes out in stupid ways. Like, go there. Know that God is there. Journey into the darkness of the world. I love it that our mission team came back yesterday from Puerto Rico. Do you remember Puerto Rico? That seems like a long time ago. Think if you lived in Puerto Rico, how long ago it seems, because the people in Puerto Rico, they still do not have electricity. They still do not have lights. I love it that our church went to be with people who are in the dark. Journey underground, go deep. I don't know if you've had the privilege of reading Colin Whitehead's great novel, The Underground Railroad. There's a scene toward the end where Cora is a slave, and she escapes slavery in Georgia with people helping through the Underground Railroad, and she's almost made it to Indiana, and she finds herself in this underground tunnel that's been dug out by people that are trying to free slaves. And she's in that tunnel, and she says this: on one end, there was who you were before you went underground, and on the other end, a new person steps out into the light. The up-top world must be so ordinary compared to this miracle beneath. Cora ran her hand along the wall of the tunnel, the ridges and pockets. Her fingers danced over valleys, rivers, the peaks of mountains, the contours of a new nation hidden beneath the old. Look outside and you'll find the true face of America. She could not see it, but she felt it. Let's be very clear. Like, you may have some wish list for Christmas, but that's dumb, right? Like, oh, I want 12 things for Christmas. Like, forget that. Like, what you want, what you crave this Advent is you crave a new and different kind of nation. You crave a new and different kind of soul. And the way to get there is to go in the dark. If you think about it, the most important things about you happen not in the light of day, but in the dark. Your heart is beating right now. Like, you may think you own some precious things. Oh, I got a nice portfolio and some diamonds and a cool house. You want to know what's really valuable? Your heart is beating inside you in the dark. Your lungs are respirating inside you in the dark. The most important moments in your life. It's not when you graduate kindergarten or college or get married or any of that stuff. The most important moments in your life are when you're in your mother's womb, developing, unseen, clinging to a cord. I kind of hate that we cut Christmas trees and bring them into the house. I mean, they look pretty, but it's sad because what we actually do is we cut the tree off right above the most important part of the tree. The most important part of the tree is not the trunk or the branches or the leaves that look pretty. The heart of the tree is what's underground. It's the roots. That's where the stability is. That's where the nutrition is. That's where the life is. My brothers and sisters, slow down. Slow down. Go into the dark. That's where the life is. That's where God is.
Hey, thank you for watching, and we hope you got something out of that. If you have any feedback for us, any response that was helpful to you, we would love to hear that. Please let us know. And everything that we put out is free, and we want it to be that way, but if you're able and feel led to support the mission of our church or the cost of providing this online content, here's how to do so.